Up next, the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. After this message.
Evergreen's calling.
Are you getting enough CBD each day? Hemp Meds carries the most trusted CBD oil brands like Real Scientific Hemp Oil and Dixie Botanicals to make it easy to add cannabinoids like CBD to your diet. We hold all our hemp oil products to our rigorous triple lab tested standard to ensure that you and your family receive only the highest quality and most reliable CBD products. Hemp Meds is your trusted source for CBD. Visit hempmeds.com to get our premium CBD oil today. Use discount code CBD20 to get 20% off your first order. And now, broadcasting on StarWorldWideNetworks.com, it's time for the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show with Snowden Bishop. Listen in as Snowden interviews cannabis industry pioneers, marijuana experts, policymakers, medical practitioners, patients, and other amazing individuals with compelling stories to share. It all happens right now. Here's the Cannabis Reporter, Snowden Bishop.
Hi, and welcome back to the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Snowden Bishop and excited about today's show because we are continuing with our series on hemp. So if you've tuned in lately, you've heard me say time and again that hemp is one of my all-time favorite subjects. That's mainly because there are so many aspects to talk about. So far, we focused on ways in which legalizing hemp could solve so many economic, environmental, and social problems facing the U.S. We've also talked about the absurdity of hemp prohibition and how the anti-prohibition movement began. Maybe you'll recall the interview with David Bronner, who told us his colorful story about being arrested for planting seeds on the front lawn of the DEA museum back in the early 90s. We've also heard from numerous doctors about medical breakthroughs and the many recent applications of hemp CBD. But more recently, we spoke about the innovative hemp sports car and spoke with attorney Bob Hoban about winning a lawsuit against the DEA, which made hemp products legal to import and sell anywhere in the U.S. Just last week, we also spoke with Micah Nelson about how current policy bars domestic farmers from enjoying lucrative returns from the billion-dollar hemp industry. He also talked about his efforts to bring back Hemp for Victory, a campaign that was originally done in the 1940s, and he is an advocate for the American Hemp Association. But for the first time today, we're going to talk about the recent congressional efforts to legalize hemp. Before I get to that, I think it's important to put these efforts into historical context and briefly explain why hemp is still illegal to grow in the U.S. The most disturbing aspect of cannabis prohibition at the federal level is the statute under the Controlled Substances Act had completely omitted any distinction between hemp and marijuana. Why remains a mystery. Some hemp historians attribute the prohibition to a racial bias or fear of immigration and cultural inequities that were prevalent during the era. Others blame an equally sinister conspiracy to eliminate competition for fossil fuels, including lumber, petrochemicals, which eventually replaced hemp as raw materials for making plastics, rope, composite, textiles, and paper, just to name a few. Regardless of which theory makes more sense, the origins of the widespread confusion about hemp could probably be traced back to the well-executed but factually misleading Reefer Madness campaign, which demonized cannabis as the devil's weed that caused immigrant farm workers to commit atrocities against white women. To any farmer who is knowledgeable about the distinction between the two varieties of cannabis, the propaganda campaign might have appeared ridiculous. However, the campaign did distract the public long enough to allow discreet lawmakers to avoid any would-be public protest of the impending legislation. Passage of the Tax Act of 1937 banned use of all species of cannabis and subjected the industrial hemp farmers to expensive taxes. Furthermore, and most ironically, applying for the tax stamp itself was self-incriminating. In other words, farmers would unwittingly waive their Fifth Amendment rights to pay tax on a crop that had been grown in violation of federal law. Hemp prohibition was devastating to the American farmers, who had until then enjoyed the returns from the resilient cash crop. farmers in Kentucky were impacted the most, and they have the most to gain if and when hemp prohibition ends. That brings us to today's topic, and I am excited to introduce our guests. But first, Dr. Brian Donner has our Medical Marijuana Minute. What do you have for us today, Dr. Donner?
Thank you, Snowden. I feel encouraged by recent congressional efforts to introduce legislation making hemp and medical marijuana more accessible to patients who need it. Coming from a medical perspective, it is my opinion that cannabis never belonged in Schedule I, alongside dangerous drugs that have no medical use and a high potential for abuse. This is particularly true of hemp, which has zero psychoactive effect and contains only trace amounts of THC. As I mentioned last week, the distinction between hemp and marijuana was not well known by the time Congress passed the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. Since all forms of cannabis had been banned since the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act of 1937, the medical benefits of hemp had also been long forgotten by the medical community. So it's understandable that no one objected at that time. But why hemp was ever scheduled in the first place remains a mystery, especially when you consider that it was a lucrative cash crop used for industry and medicine. According to an editorial in a 1937 issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, the AMA wasn't informed until 2 days before Congress would vote on the measure. Despite strong objection, it passed. Doctors were stunned to learn that cannabis, which had been used as medicine for centuries, would now be banned. The benefits of hemp and medical marijuana are becoming more widely known with the advent of state regulation in recent years. We now have a growing body of evidence that cannabis is a safe and effective medicine. It also has lower potential for abuse than some of the most frequently prescribed legal drugs. More importantly, we also now know that molecules found in the cannabis plant can be intrinsically important for maintaining human health and homeostasis. With that in mind, it seems that legislation to legalize hemp and medical cannabis is long overdue. Fortunately, CBD extracted from the hemp stock is legal to import and sell anywhere in the U.S. thanks to a Ninth Circuit appellate court ruling that supersedes DEA policy. While high-quality hemp CBD extracts can potentially be enormously beneficial for treating certain conditions and disease processes, it's not enough for patients whose condition require medicine that can only be derived from prohibited cannabis varieties. State regulation is a great step in the right direction, but it's not enough to protect patients from federal prosecution or prevent doctors from potentially losing their DEA license for prescribing cannabis to their patients who need it. It is my hope that with more awareness, Congress will realize the importance of passing sensible legislation to remove all forms of cannabis from Schedule I listing so that doctors and patients can take advantage of the potential healing benefits without threat of repercussion or prosecution. I'm Dr. Brian Donner for the Cannabis Reporter. I'll be back again next week with another Medical Marijuana Minute. Back to you, Snowden.
Thank you so much, Dr. Donner. We look forward to hearing from you again next week with another edition of the Medical Marijuana Minute. It's time to get started. I am very excited to introduce our guests. First, I'd like to introduce Brian Furnish. He's the Director of Global Production at a company called Ananda Hemp. There, he's responsible for the oversight and alignment of U.S. farmers to ensure sustainability and security of production. As an eighth-generation tobacco farmer from Kentucky, Brian has been an instrumental player in establishing the legislation of industrial hemp in the U.S. Brian has a deep experience in Washington, D.C., working with a range of congressional staff members. He's the former chairman of the Kentucky Hemp Industry Association and has held a range of directorships across agricultural organizations. Thank you so much for being here, Brian. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm glad to be here.
And next, I'm so honored to introduce Congressman James Comer. He was elected to Congress in 2016 to represent the 1st District of the state of Kentucky, which has 35 counties. Congressman Comer is exceedingly qualified to represent Kentucky farmers and advocate for hemp in his state of Kentucky. Last month, he introduced H.R. 3530, a new version of the Industrial Hemp Farming Act, along with 15 co-sponsors and bipartisan support. He entered the business world in 1993 when he purchased his first farm. Today, the Comer family farm is one of the largest farming operations in south central Kentucky. After his first election in the year 2000, Congressman Comer served for 6 terms as a member of the Kentucky State House. In 2011, he was elected to serve as Kentucky's Commissioner of Agriculture. His work to root out wasteful spending and fraud, return taxpayer dollars to the Treasury, and grow Kentucky's agricultural economy received bipartisan acclaim. Well-deserved acclaim, I might add. He promoted rural economic development by spearheading the successful effort to legalize industrial hemp in Kentucky, and today he's a fierce advocate for rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, balancing the federal budget, and implementing business-friendly policies, including regulatory reform. With that, I'm so glad that you could be here, and I'm excited to start talking about the new piece of legislation that you've recently introduced. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start by mentioning that this is not the first rodeo for a hemp bill in Congress. And it seems as though there have been a number of congressional representatives from both sides of the aisle who have tried in the past to enact some legislation to legalize hemp. So I'm curious to know, with this particular bill, do you see a greater chance of its passage?
Absolutely. The hemp legislation goes back to when Ron Paul was in the Congress. He was the first person that I can find that filed legislation to essentially legalize industrial hemp. And what his legislation did, his original bill, just simply amended the Controlled Substances Act and took hemp out, being defined as a controlled substance, and put it in as just a regular agricultural crop. My bill does the same thing, plus a lot more. And what's different this year in years past is that a lot of states have legalized industrial hemp. Like Kentucky was the first. You have countless states now that have either passed legislation to set up a regulatory framework or have bills going through the General Assembly currently to legalize industrial hemp. So the Congress is a lot more educated about industrial hemp now, whereas when Ron Paul filed the bill and then Thomas Massey, my good friend from Northern Kentucky, filed bills, there were still a lot of congressmen that couldn't differentiate between industrial hemp and marijuana. Now the majority of Congress knows the difference, and they understand that industrial hemp is an agricultural crop. It is not a controlled substance. It's not a drug. So I think that the fear of doing something that would be perceived to be anti-law enforcement or pro-drug is not there in the Congress. Another difference is the bill would always make it to the Judiciary Committee, and then it would never be heard because of a lack of support. But when I got elected to Congress, coming straight off from being Commissioner of Agriculture in Kentucky and working with great people like Brian Furnish to set the standard in Kentucky for industrial hemp, I came to Congress with some credibility with the fact that as Commissioner of Agriculture, we tested the industrial hemp, we marketed the industrial hemp, we gave licenses for growers, we worked with universities to do research projects on industrial hemp, and it's been a huge success in Kentucky. So I sat down with Bob Goodlatte, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. We worked together on a compromise along with Jared Paulus and Thomas Massey, and we came together and filed this piece of legislation. So the thing that stands out already with this bill and bills in the past is one of the main co-sponsors is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, I'll say that's a big deal. That's a big change from the years prior.
It's a big change because, again, there was never enough support to get it through the House Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee is very conservative, just very pro-law enforcement. If you had one law enforcement official have an objection, then the bill would essentially be dead. But through the education process, through all the different industrial hemp groups, and through programs like yours that have educated the public on this, we face much better odds this Congress in passing this legislation. Also, if you look at the Senate, Congress, I think most people would agree, is dysfunctional right now, but this bill has bipartisan support. You mentioned we had 15 co-sponsors, but since we filed the bill, and I filed the bill on the last day before the August recess, we've had about 10 more members of Congress call wanting to be co-sponsors. So you're going to see that list significantly increase. The grassroots will start kicking in. More and more congressmen will sign on. But in the Senate, Senator McConnell is a big supporter of this. A lot of people are surprised when I say that. The Senator McConnell is very supportive. Rand Paul is very supportive. And then Ron Wyden is very supportive. So you have bipartisan support in the Senate. So I believe that this bill will pass. I've met with Kevin McCarthy, who is the majority leader from California, Republican. He is given the green light for this bill to move through the process. You have to have the majority leader on board if a bill is going to become law. So a lot of the legwork's been done, and now it's just up to people that listen to your show that are pro-hemp to call their congressmen and senators and encourage them to support this bill.
I will do that. I actually do that quite a bit on this show, especially when there's some political pushback on the state or on the federal level with some of the legislation. Recently, we had an issue. The Arizona House really rarely comes together on anything. They're very divided along party lines, really. And the hemp bill here in the state of Arizona was passed with overwhelming support. I think 97% support for this bill. And once it landed on the governor's desk, he vetoed it, and I was completely shocked because for our House to come together on anything of that magnitude, it just seemed really surprising. And I started looking into it, and I could only come up with two explanations. One is a lack of awareness and fear of what it would mean for the state of Arizona, or two, there's a significant lobby, or if there's a political reason behind it. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because when the hemp bills have failed to pass previously, I often wonder if it's, related to fear of the unknown, or if it's just that it gets to the Judicial Committee and it makes for confusion because the plant subspecies look very much alike. And so is the law enforcement aspect of it, is there confusion on the DEA level, really? Would that be a reason why it never passed? Or would lobbyists be getting in the way of this? What's your feeling on that?
I'm very pro law enforcement, except when it comes to hemp, because when we were pushing Senate Bill 50, and Brian Furnish was very involved in this as well, we had Kentucky law enforcement come out adamantly opposed to it. And my theory was, and this was very controversial, my theory was that Kentucky gets a lot of marijuana eradication money, a lot of federal money funneled through some quasi-government entities set up through drug task force groups.
Yeah.
And they felt like this would somehow interfere. This would interfere with their and diminish their marijuana eradication money, which, why are we spending money? Why are we spending all this money on marijuana when we have prescription pain pills, meth, heroin, and all that? We have a drug problem in Kentucky. It's not marijuana. But anyway, all of our drug efforts go for marijuana in Kentucky. So that was, to me, why we had so much resistance in Kentucky from law enforcement. Then I think those of you that have kept up with the hemp ordeal we had in Kentucky, when we finally legalized it, we finally got seeds shipped in, the DEA confiscated our seeds, and as Commissioner of Agriculture, I had the Kentucky Department of Agriculture sue the DEA to get our seeds back. We went to federal court, and you never know what you're going to get in federal court, but the judge knew all about hemp, and he scolded the DEA. Of course, you couldn't allow cameras or anything in federal court at this time, but he scolded the DEA and asked the DEA, why, with this huge drug problem we're having in America, are you worried about confiscating the Kentucky Department of Agriculture's industrial hemp seeds that were, by the way, going to the University of Kentucky to be used for research purposes. So, it's silly that we have had this prohibition for this long. Law enforcement's always been on the wrong side. DEA has always been on the wrong side of this issue. I support, trying to combat illegal drugs, but, to classify hemp in with heroin and everything else is just, it's kind of embarrassing that our federal government does that. So I believe our Congress, the majority of the members of Congress see this now. So I'm confident that we can pass this bill in the House and in the Senate. Now, I have no idea where the Trump administration stands on this issue, but I know that if this is just a straight-up vote in Congress, that the votes are there in both the House and the Senate to pass this bill.
Yeah, well, I really root for it to pass, and it just seems as though there's no logical reason whatsoever that it shouldn't this time around. I mean, enough people know the truth about why hemp was made illegal in the first place that, there's just no denying that it makes perfect sense, plus the advantage to the American farmer, which is
absolutely
huge.
And that's always been the angle. I'm a farmer. My whole life's been about agriculture. My degree's in agriculture. It was my first business I started was in agriculture, and then I was elected commissioner of agriculture in Kentucky. And this is a win-win for everyone in agriculture. For farmers, it's another tool in the toolbox. Kentucky used to be a huge tobacco state. We still are the biggest tobacco state, but the tobacco industry's changed. Instead of every farmer growing a little tobacco, now there's just a few big farmers that grow tobacco. So we have to find alternative crops for our farmers. Hemp was perfect because it could be grown on marginal land. That's, in other words, it doesn't have to be that flat, fertile land like you see in Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. It could be some hills and hollers in Kentucky, and it's sustainable.
Yeah.
For people that are worried about the environment, the less pesticides, less fertilizer, the things that hemp would be made into can replace a lot of products we're currently using plastic or wood to make. So if you're into sustainability, and most young people are, it's a win, and it's economically viable. When we worked with Congress to be able to commercialize, the first step we did in Kentucky was to set up regulatory framework for pilot projects to be used with universities. The next step was to allow commercialization, to where companies like Brian Furnish is on the phone, where his could come in and start commercializing hemp. What we've proven is it's very economically viable. And there are plenty of investors that want to come in and invest money to develop the infrastructure for hemp, but they're afraid now because hemp is still classified as a controlled substance. If this bill passes, I think you're going to see an influx of private sector money come in for hemp. I think you're going to see a lot of startups involved around hemp, and I think you're going to see a lot of family farmers that are able to stay on their farms because they've got a viable crop that they can grow and feed their family. So I'm real excited about the bill, and I hope that we can get it passed.
Yeah, and Brian, as a hemp farmer now in Kentucky, how is business?
It's good. This is our fifth crop this year. We started out kind of in a research phase. I was lucky to get associated with a company called Ecofiber out of Australia. The guy had 18 years of experience in collecting varieties from all over the world. And so we had somewhat of a head start here, and that's the reason I selected his company, is because they knew something about the agriculture. They had good varieties. They knew the machinery. And so we're doing good. We've raised over 1,000 acres of hemp here in Kentucky and harvested all of it except 4 acres, which is very good. My company's invested over $10 million into Kentucky. We're working with 10 family farmers around Kentucky to grow a crop for us. And we have hired 20 employees here in Kentucky to work for us. And we're starting to see sales branch out of our Ananda hemp product all over the United States. And so we see a very steep growth pattern for us. And we're very optimistic about what we're doing. We're looking at all three phases of hemp production. We're doing fiber production, seed production for food, and we're doing medicinal type production for full spectrum hemp products that we're selling. We don't just focus on CBD. We focus on right now at least 10 cannabinoids are present in our product, and so that kind of sets us apart from some of the other competition.
Yeah, I can imagine. And actually, I've seen your products, and I am using one of your products. It's a CBD tincture for my father who has Parkinson's and other neurological issues, and it's actually an amazing product. And I was really grateful to have met Eric, who I believe is he the CEO or are you the CEO? I can't remember.
No, Eric's actually the CEO. I'm the president of our production division in Kentucky, and then oversee global production. Eric's our CEO, and he's in Australia. And yeah, we feel really good about what we're doing. We've got a lot of research going on. We've our new medical director just started. She's the first doctor of cannabinoid therapy in the United States, and she's working for our company. And so we want to be responsible. We want to help people, not only help farmers, but help consumers, and we want to study it. One of our major investors in Australia started 2 Lambert Centers for Cannabis Research, one in Australia for $36 million investment to Sydney University, and then another at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And so, we feel like we're doing the right things, and we want to put the science behind it and grow this crop and create an industry that's sustainable here in Kentucky and can help our farmers stay on the farm.
Yeah, that is just going to be such an amazing boon for the farmers to have hemp legalized everywhere. And I want to ask both of you this question, but Brian, when you started working with the Congressman on getting this piece of legislation created, how much input about the difference between regular tobacco farming and the hemp farming, what were the real advantages to transitioning into hemp farming when you compare it to a regular cash crop like tobacco?
Well, the good thing about here in Kentucky is we had the experience. We've got the proper soil types. We got the proper rainfall. And the best thing about what we're doing here in Kentucky for the full spectrum hemp oil products is we have the infrastructure in place, because a lot of the things we do, we just took straight from the tobacco production model, the transplant equipment, the greenhouses that start the plants, all the way down to the curing facilities that we use for tobacco. We use those to dry our hemp products naturally. Okay. So that kind of sets us apart from other people. We're able to let the natural environment grow the plant and without pesticides and insecticides and all those things, and then put it in a natural curing environment here in Kentucky the same way we've done tobacco for many, many years. And it gives us a superior product because we're not cooking the product down really hot like most people do and cooking the acid forms out of the product. We're able to retain all of those based on the system we use here. And so we've got the labor force in place to do that, and it's just a really good fit for right here in Kentucky.
Yeah, and Kentucky was actually one of the biggest producers of hemp before the prohibition began as well.
Yeah, that's correct. Most of that was used for rope and for fiber, and we plan to bring the first true hemp fiber mill to Kentucky in the next 12 months and have that operational, and we're really looking forward to that because that can really expand our acreage. Our acreage of production in Kentucky will go up tenfold once we have that production facility in place for fiber.
Yeah. And how did you and Congressman Comer meet one another?
Basically, just growing up in agriculture here in Kentucky, he was a very young person in the state House of Representatives, and he was very aggressive on agriculture. And I was an executive in the tobacco industry, traveling all over the world. And anytime I needed help, I called on him to help me through issues here in Kentucky. And when hemp came up, I think I was one of the first persons he called to ask me to get involved. In the beginning, years ago, I did it as a friendship because I didn't think hemp was that viable here in Kentucky. But once I got to researching it, people got to calling me, we got to spending time on it, I got really excited about it really fast.
Yeah, and I mean, it was exciting for us on the outside, not being in Kentucky, but to watch the transition and Kentucky embracing hemp regulation in such a positive way. I mean, it's very exciting for all of us who advocate.
I have to give all that credit to Congressman Comer, because when he was Commissioner of Agriculture, he put this on the forefront and made this his issue. And without that, we would never have gotten through this process as fast as we have, because I worked on legislation in Frankfort and Washington for many years, and things just don't move as fast as what this bill and this hemp issue made it through Kentucky and then onto the Farm Bill, the 2014 Farm Bill. It was pretty remarkable how fast we were able to make that happen.
Yeah. Congressman Comer, I wanted to ask you, what was the very first spark of interest in hemp for you?
Well, as a candidate for Commissioner of Agriculture, I was driving down the road thinking about ways to help farmers, and somebody had a conversation with me a few weeks earlier about industrial hemp, and I knew what it was, but I didn't know that much about it. And I was spending the night in the hotel, and I had my laptop and just started doing research on it. And, as Brian mentioned, it was a native crop to Kentucky. Kentucky was the leading industrial hemp producing state during the war, World War II, I guess it was. So I thought, let's do this. Let's take a stand on this industrial hemp, and it was a good issue for me. I was a Republican. I was the only Republican that got elected that year. Agriculture is a statewide elected office like governor, attorney general, treasurer, auditor, and all that. And it wasn't a good year to be a Republican in 2011, but I really believe that I got so much press talking about hemp because it was outside the box and no other state was doing it. And at that time, everybody that was for legalizing industrial hemp was also for legalizing marijuana, and there weren't any farmers advocating for it. So put together a coalition with people like Brian Furnish and Senator Paul Hornback, who's a state senator in Kentucky, who's also a big tobacco farmer from Shelbyville. And we traveled the state. Rand Paul got on board and he had always been supportive of this because his father was Ron Paul, who was supportive of it in the House. So people started coming out of the woodwork, and the hemp groups started forming and Vote Hemp. Dr. Bronner was very active in the campaign and educating people. So what you have to do when you pass a bill is, I'm trying to get the president to do this. What you do is you travel around and you advocate for the bill, and you educate the public and you build support for it. Then you have it voted on in the legislative body, and if the public's behind it, if the public's behind something, then they will force their legislators to vote for it. And that's what happened in Kentucky.
Yeah.
The governor at the time was against it, who was a Democrat. The president of the Senate was a Republican. He was against it. The Speaker of the House was a Democrat. He was against it. So I like to say we had bipartisan opposition to the bill, but the public was for it. And it was a grassroots movement. And I think we can do the same thing in Washington, because the grassroots has been calling their congressman on hemp bills in the past. So the momentum's been building for a long time, and I feel like I'm getting to Congress at the right time to be able to carry this bill, and people like Thomas Massey and Jerry Paulus are helping, and of course Bob Goodlatte. So I believe that we've got the manpower to get it through. It's just a matter of trying to get Congress functional enough to pass a piece of legislation. I think people will faint in Washington when they see it's actually a true bipartisan bill. There haven't been a lot of those since I've been there.
Well, I think that this is actually one issue that is, there are so many benefits from environmental to economic to social, all across the spectrum, to medical, for legalizing hemp, that this is one issue that actually could bring a divided Congress together. And I've always believed that, and I hope that that's what happens. But I think you're right. I think that getting the public, getting constituents to, call the representatives and to advocate for this, but that takes education, which of course is why we're here. And I mean, people thought we were nuts for going to radio with the subject of cannabis, and especially in states where they haven't embraced any regulation whatsoever, not even for medical use. But I think that it takes normalizing the conversation, getting people out of the green closet to talk about it, and especially those who previously had no knowledge that hemp wasn't a drug that could, get children high. I really admire both of you actually for really moving this forward in Kentucky in such a big way. And I think the success in Kentucky is really going to be instructive for the rest of the country.
I hope so. It's been a real success story in Kentucky. We're a poor state. There are a lot of states that have a big agriculture base, but our agriculture is different. We don't have the large-scale farms like you see out in the Midwest, so the average income for our average farmer is significantly lower in Kentucky than a lot of the other big farm states. So this is a crop that's more geared towards smaller farmers.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are struggling, the smaller farmers. The big farmers are it's been a tough year for commodity prices, but year in and year out, the big farmers have done very well over the last decade. The smaller farmers have struggled a little bit. And this is the perfect crop for smaller farmers. But for this to succeed, we have to have companies like Furnish's. We have to have the processors, the companies that take the hemp and process it, whether they're making CBD oil, whether they're making fiber for clothing or manufacturing, or for the automotive industry, for hemp-reat, for the construction industry, whatever the end use is, we have to have those processors in the state and or in America. And I think that if we pass this legislation, there will be a flood of private sector money coming in, because there's so many hedge funds and investors now that want to be socially responsible, that want to invest their money in sustainable industries. And there's no better sustainable industry to invest in agriculture than industrial hemp.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think what the beauty of it, like you said, it grows with very few pesticides, very little water. Mm-hmm. People who are advocates for environmental causes can really get behind this. And I think it'll transform the way that brownfields are remediated, because it's carbon negative plant.
Right.
And it can actually clean up some of the mess that's made by GMOs and that sort of thing. So I'm excited about it. And in fact, environmental issues were the reason I started learning about it to begin with. But it's very exciting to me.
Yeah, it has a lot of potential, and it's just it's amazing the industry's done as well as it has with the regulations that are in place. And when we passed Senate Bill 50 in Kentucky to set up a regulatory framework, we had to heavily regulate hemp because it was illegal prior to that. Well, now we've demonstrated in Kentucky and other states that it's not a drug. So the law enforcement were testifying in committees in the Senate in Frankfurt, our state capital, that people would be sneaking into hemp fields and cutting the plants down and getting high and then having a wreck on the way home. Just crazy, stupid stuff that we've proven hasn't happened. We've tested the THC levels, so we know which varieties have very low THC or no THC. So we've got that down. We've proven it's economically viable. The universities love it. We have two universities in Kentucky, the University of Kentucky and Murray State University, which is in my congressional district in Western Kentucky, that are doing a ton of work with research and development for hemp. And they're getting private dollars coming in. They're getting grant dollars coming in to do research. They're attracting students to those universities that are like yourself, that are very interested and passionate about industrial hemp. So it's been a huge win in Kentucky, and that's the story that I'm trying to tell in Congress, that we can make this a huge win for America, and this is something that we need to focus on. This is a year. Next year, we'll be voting on a farm bill, which just happens every 4 or 5 years, and to me, what we need to focus on in the Farm Bill and agriculture is help for smaller farmers, because the big farmers always do well. It's just like the big companies always do well in tax reform, but it's the small businesses and the working class people that usually get left out in Congress. We need to focus on small farmers, and this bill, to me, will really be an asset for a lot of small farmers in America. And I hope that we can lead a movement to encourage Congress to get to work and get this bill passed.
Yeah, and the economic upside for the entire country is huge as well. I would think, with the tax dollars that can come in from it.
Absolutely.
And right now, a lot of the farmers are watching these imports come into $1 billion industry in this country, and I'm sure that so many in all of the farming states are just wondering, okay, when are we going to be able to enjoy this?
Absolutely. It should have been done 20 years ago. It should have never been, there should never have been a prohibition to begin with, but it should have been lifted 20 years ago. So
or never classified alongside heroin or LSD
Absolutely.
to begin with. And, what did you think? You must have been scratching your head when the DEA sent out the register at the end of last year saying that they were adding a separate numerical class for CBD under the controlled substances. I mean,
there's no reason for hemp or CBD to be treated the way that they've been treated by the DEA. I mean, the DEA has plenty of work to do.
Yeah.
I can assure you. I'm in a part of the world that's just been devastated by illegal drugs.
Yeah.
But for all this focus on marijuana and hemp makes no sense to me. It's very frustrating as a member of Congress that the DEA gets any funding if they're going to spend time and money and valuable resources picking on industrial hemp and CBD. It really makes me mad and really makes me want to do something about the DEA. But
it was interesting. During the last administration and the omnibus budget, I think it was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, they actually eliminated the funding to go after hemp and CBD producer, or hemp producers in general, and actually in marijuana in legalized states as well. And just a couple of months ago, the current administration decided to reverse that measure, and I thought, that is so strange. Why? I would think that they'd be pro-business in that way and just leave it alone, but it was very confusing to me.
I'm trying to get a meeting with the Trump administration to talk to them about that. I don't know if it's Attorney General Sessions or Trump or what, but I applaud the Trump administration's efforts to improve the regulatory environment. But I believe they've made a mistake with that one, and I'm going to sit down and try to educate them, because I am pretty confident that they don't know the difference between industrial hemp and marijuana. So those are people that are going to have to be sat down with. Now, I have talked to the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, who was from Georgia, former governor of Georgia. He did not know initially the difference. He did not know hardly anything about industrial hemp. Mm-hmm. And when mentioned hemp, he thought I was, just talking about marijuana and all that. But I have spoken with him. Senator McConnell has spoken with him. Senator Paul has spoken with him. So the last time I talked to Sonny Perdue, I think he's come a long way with respect to hemp. I don't think he has a problem with hemp, but obviously the ones in the Trump administration that we have to make sure aren't opposed to this bill would be the president, of course, and the attorney general. So these are meetings I'm trying to get set up, and hopefully we can make sure that they understand the benefits of this and why we're doing this bill and why it's needed.
Yeah, well, I would really love to hear the outcome of that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Just recently, the USDA, under the new administration, after the meetings with Congressman Comer, has let us know that they're open for business, that hemp companies and growers can apply for grants. And so that's a positive change that just happened recently.
Wow. Yeah, you know what? I wasn't aware of that. I'll look it up immediately. Yeah. I mean, that'd be great. But I think that educating Attorney General Sessions is going to be a little bit more difficult than educating the president on it. I mean, in the past, President Trump has actually advocated for medical marijuana anyway. And it seems as though prior to the election, he was a little bit more friendly toward the movement than he has been lately. And I don't know if that's because of Attorney General Sessions' disdain for the topic or not, but it would be, I'm sure that educating anyone in the Trump administration about it could be beneficial to the cause. So kudos. And I look forward to hearing the outcome of that as well.
Well, I will definitely let you know. And as Brian said, the Agriculture Secretary Perdue has come around, and he is, I'm confident, going to be very supportive of farmers growing industrial hemp. You know, with the CBD, I think we have some pharmaceutical companies and probably some lobbyists that are making the water a little murky.
Yeah.
With that.
We have a big one here.
That's a whole
who's
different
doing
deal.
It. Yeah.
That's a whole different deal when you start talking about CBD, right?
Yeah, but the other thing too, Congressman, that concerns me a little bit, making hemp legal on a federal level, what scares me is putting it in the hands of big agriculture farming that might, because it doesn't need all of those chemicals, it doesn't need any genetic engineering in this other side from just, breeding certain strains for medicine or stronger industrial material. It doesn't need a lot of the things that are dependent upon the fossil fuels, which I think that if it gets into the wrong hands, it's entirely possible that it could contaminate the more organic substance that's grown now under state regulation. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think so. I haven't seen a interest among big agriculture. Brian knows a lot more about this than I do. I haven't seen the interest from the big agriculture companies with respect to hemp. Everyone that I know of that's excited about hemp and investing in hemp are smaller companies like what Brian Furnish is a part of, but and the ones in Kentucky are all the true definition of small businesses. The only part of the hemp industry that I think that could be the case would be with the CBD and the pharmaceutical companies. We're having a terrible time in Washington trying to fix healthcare. Whether you support Obamacare or whether you're opposed to Obamacare, I think we would have to agree there are a lot of problems with healthcare right now that need to be fixed. And you've got a lot of the pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies that are making it very hard to get anything done on either side with healthcare. And that would be the only part. But Brian may have a different perspective of that than I do. He knows more about the industry.
What do you think, Brian?
I think for the near future, it's going to stay in the hands of the small family farm operations and the smaller businesses. Down the road, looking 15 or 20 years, you don't ever know. But the thing that I love about this plant is, and one thing our company does very well, is grow it in its natural environment.
Right.
A lot of the other growers and marijuana people, they do greenhouse production and clones, and it's not a natural environment for a plant, so you've got a lot of issues there. And so, this hemp thrives outside, and that's the way we grow it. And it does very well. And once you get it established and out of the ground, it pretty much takes care of itself, and that's the good thing about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too, that when you mention the drugs, there have been a number of synthetic marijuana drugs that have been approved through the FDA, and they're basically one molecule tag off of regular old THC, but they've caused a lot of problems. I mean, they have side effects because they're synthetic, whereas there are very few side effects of a natural plant. So, I mean, that could be a concern. And are there any protections from adulterating natural hemp products in the hemp bill?
There are not, and I don't know that much about the marijuana. I don't have a problem with that. I've just all my studies been around industrial hemp,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like Brian. I don't think there's any fear of any Monsanto or any big agriculture company coming in and really changing the industry. I think right now the industry is safe from the gigantic agriculture firms. I think it's going to be a more of a startup environment,
Mm-hmm.
more of a small business environment. The small farmers growing it, not your big, large, 20 to 75,000 acre farmers. I think it's going to be a lot of small farmers growing it, and hopefully that's the way it will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, well, I think it'll create some amazing opportunity in the land of opportunity for sure. So, any last thoughts? Because I know that we've got about 5 more minutes before we need to start wrapping up here. Any other thoughts? Something you'd like for the general public to know off the top of your head? Brian, let's start with you.
Well, I think everybody just needs to try to educate themselves on this, and that we are definitely focused on hemp here in Kentucky, and as a company, a lot of people thought that from law enforcement and other political figures that we were trying to get our nose under the tent so we could start growing marijuana in the future, and that's not the case at all. We want to grow a natural plant that does good in the natural environments here in Kentucky and the United States, and people need to educate themselves on that and get involved. For your listeners to, reach out to the members of Congress in Washington and tell them to support Congressman Comer's bill and get this thing passed. We had a huge groundswell of support here in Kentucky, and I think that it was one of the top called-in support of the bill in Frankfort in the history of the legislature when it got started in Kentucky. And I think we can do the same thing in Washington, but we need to, keep ourselves separate from hemp. I mean, our goal is that you would have recreational marijuana and medical hemp in the future, because we think we can do everything with hemp except get you high. So,
yeah.
Thank you for having me, and I'd like to continue this dialogue and invite you out to our farm and show you what we do.
Oh, I would be so delighted to see it and to learn more about what you're doing. And I know we will follow up again because John Ryan, also from Ananda Hemp, was going to join us today, but I believe he is out of the country right at the moment. And so I'd like to follow up with him on the line, as well as Eric, and just get more into the medicines that you're producing and the actual methods of producing hemp and that sort of thing. So, yeah, thank you so much. And Congressman Comer, any last thoughts, anything you have a burning desire to let people know about today's topic?
I do. If there are people out there that are involved in the industry or want to be involved in the industry, if you have questions about the bill or if you have problems with the bill, don't hesitate to contact me. You can Google me, James Comer. We have a website just like every other congressman. I read all of my messages and all of my calls and emails, and feel free to say, if you have a technical question about the bill or if you have a suggestion. And remember that when we're putting the bill together, we're getting a lot of different people on board, and it's very hard, as we've seen with the healthcare bill and with tax reform in Washington. It's hard to get a majority of 435 people to agree on anything, and what has to happen is you have to have a consensus and concessions and things like that. So there are a few things I would like the bill to be a little different on, but this is what we've got. I think it's a huge step in the right direction. But if there are questions from your listeners, or if there are concerns, please don't hesitate to give me a call. The Senate is probably going to file a companion bill. It will probably be a little different. They feel free to call, Senator McConnell, Senator Paul, Senator Wyden in Oregon. Whoever their senator is, feel free to call them as they're trying to put together language on the bill. But I think we can come together and get 99% of what we need as an industry to move forward passed in this legislation. So that was something I wanted to mention to your listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we will definitely put information about you and how to contact you up on our website when we post the episode. And and thank you so much for all of that. And I know that the industry is moving right along, and I really hope you're successful in getting this piece of legislation passed. It is so important, I think, to our future. It's an incredible legacy that we can leave for future generations. So I thank you for taking the lead on that and really support what you're doing with it. And I'm eager to find out how it goes when you do get the ear of the Trump administration to see if maybe you can change some hearts and minds there as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your interest and passion and all the education that you do with respect to hemp.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really grateful to both of you for being on today. And I look forward to speaking again sometime in the near future. So thanks again.
Well, come on to Washington sometime, and we'll do another interview and go into more detail on what's going on up there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm getting the heads up from our producer, Rob, today, who is letting me know that it's time for us to close this show. So once again, thank you to my guests, Brian Furnish and Congressman James Comer, for sharing their insights and knowledge with us today. If you want to learn more about the Kentucky hemp industry or the Hemp Farming Act, please visit us online at thecannabisreporter.com and click broadcast to find today's episode. I will post their biographies and a link to the websites. If you'd like to see reform on hemp legalization or the industry, the cannabis industry at large, we encourage you to get involved. Contact your representatives and senators to let them know how you feel and to ask whatever questions you have about it, because this is one thing that we can do for future generations together. We have a lot of folks to thank here at the Cannabis Reporter. First, I'd like to express our gratitude for our radio sponsors, Hemp Meds and HealthTerra. We sincerely could not be doing this without you, so thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Dr. Brian Donner for our Medical Marijuana Minute update. He'll be back again next week with another edition of the Medical Marijuana Minute. Thanks to our program director, Steve, at XRQK Networks, Eric Goodall for our theme song, Evergreen, and Compassionate Certification Centers for sharing our news. And of course, it goes without saying how much we appreciate our producer, Rob, and the team here at Star Worldwide Networks for making us shine. Last but not least, thank you to all of you for listening. Tune in again next week, same time, same place, for another episode of the Cannabis Reporter Radio Show. I'm Snowden Bishop, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay informed, share what you've learned, and make it a great day.
Evergreen is calling, evergreen is always where I feel divine. The blue is blue falling, and sheets made forever.
Are you getting enough CBD each day? Hemp Meds carries the most trusted CBD oil brands like Real Scientific Hemp Oil and Dixie Botanicals to make it easy to add cannabinoids like CBD to your diet. We hold all our hemp oil products to our rigorous triple lab tested standard to ensure that you and your family receive only the highest quality and most reliable CBD products. Hemp Meds is your trusted source for CBD. Visit hempmeds.com to get our premium CBD oil today. Use discount code CBD20 to get 20% off your first order.
You're busy, running around from work to kids to evening events. Healthcare shouldn't be adding to your daily running around. Simplify your healthcare with HealthTerra for only $15 per month per individual or $18 per month per family with up to 9 kids, by the way. You can eliminate doctor office visits with 24/7 access to doctors via phone, video, or the mobile app. Not only do you get prescriptions filled over the phone, but save up to 85% on those prescriptions. This is a supplemental plan and not insurance. Healthcare made easy. HealthTerra.com.